Hello and welcome to Auspol Explained. I'm David, your curly-haired host, and I'm here to talk about potentially my most controversial take, which is that politicians should get paid. Finally, someone's standing up for politicians' paychecks, am I right? Okay, but you've almost certainly heard someone say that politicians get paid too much, or that they should take a pay cut, or even that they should not be paid at all. Now, I'm not here to argue about how much they do get paid or their entitlements, etc. That's for the comment section to help boost engagement. If you want to know how much they do get paid, well, the short answer is it varies depending on position. It's six figures. It can go up every few years. Just Bing search it like I do. That's not what this episode is about. However, right, regardless of your thoughts on if they get paid too much or not, this episode is about explaining why politicians should get paid at least something. And this isn't a hypothetical. This is a history lesson. Surprise, you're going to learn about how being a member of parliament used to be a volunteer position and why it was bad. It was really bad. It greatly limited or entirely undermined democracy in many different ways because it prevented real representation, limited accountability to the public, and encouraged corruption. Let me teach you how. Firstly, only independent, wealthy people used to be able to run for parliament. For the first few decades of most parliaments in Australia, there were no salaries. New South Wales and Queensland, for example, introduced a payment to members only in 1889. This meant that members needed to have income elsewhere, be that, being a lawyer, doctor, investor, family, wealth, etc. Obviously, Parliament was limited only to the upper class and wealthy because of this. Just like in the UK, to vote in Australia for most of the 19th century, you needed to own property of a decent value. If you owned a house but it was cheap, that meant that you could be too poor to vote, meaning voting was only available to 10% of people. The system was that only rich landowners were voted in by only rich landowners, and so first and foremost, their legislative decisions needed to benefit the rich because that's who would return them to their seats at the next election. Now, it's not like members can't act outside of their own self-interests, but if members made a law that negatively impacted poor people, then what were poor people going to do? They couldn't vote, they couldn't run for parliament. There basically was no accountability and no incentive for members to listen to the public about their concerns or needs. It prevented democratic participation by the public and undermined the effectiveness of government. It also presented the problem that politicians were reliant on their own business for their wealth, and so obviously issues to do with conflicts of interest would arise. If you're a business owner, you're hardly going to introduce laws that regulate or tax your business, are you? Right? Even if it is for the broader benefit of the nation. But no salary didn't just limit the candidates by class, it also limited them by geography. Members still needed to work, but also take time off to travel and then also pay for accommodation if they didn't already live in the city. This presented an additional challenge for farmers and provincial businessmen. Many regional representatives elected in their local area would quit before the next general election because it was just too much of a financial burden and time constraint to travel to Parliament. By the way, it's not a legal requirement for a member to live in their electorate, and so this resulted in a lot of regional areas of New South Wales being represented by wealthy men living in Sydney who just nominated for a rural electorate to get elected without having to travel anywhere. This was such a big problem in the colonial era that it led to the separation of Victoria from New South Wales in 1851. That's right, an entire new state exists because of this. Originally, the eastern coast of Australia was all just one giant colony, New South Wales. But people got fed up with the farce of electing multiple members for Melbourne and Port Phillip, only for very few of them to actually live outside of Sydney, because it just wasn't practical for them to live in the areas that they represented. Basically, not only was Parliament limited to the wealthy, but it was almost entirely inner city elites. Without salaries for members, the country areas don't get proper representation. Historically, just does not happen. This situation also encouraged the temptation of corruption. Even after Victoria split, there was still the issue of travel and accommodation costs. In the 1860s, there were rumours that James McCulloch, Premier of Victoria, and his ministry had bought a boarding house in Collingwood to provide bed and breakfast to impoverished members as a way to gain their political support. To be clear, this was not confirmed, but it's very believable that it could have reasonably happened under any government during that period. This was before political parties existed, and so factional alliances in Parliament were malleable. If you wanted support from a rural member, providing accommodation and food would be a good way to sway someone's allegiance and win over votes. It's basically kind of like a bribe. It's not difficult to imagine wealthier members paying less wealthy ones for their support, leading to corruption or unsavoury practices to make up money. Showing up to Parliament was a financial loss, and it could be very time-consuming. In fact, it was later discovered in the mid-1860s that members were gambling on the outcome of legislation before the Victorian Parliament, which is absurd because, they're the ones shaping it. While paying politicians doesn't prevent corruption entirely, it does at least remove the kind of situation where it's easier for members to be financially pressured or reliant on corruption to get by. No salaries for members also meant the public lacked choice. In the 1800s, when the labour movement and unions were asking for better working conditions and pay, or even fighting against wages being cut, they were going up against businesses that reflected the interest of members and potentially could have even been owned by members or their friends. Workers could strike, and that sometimes led to demands being met, but it was economically damaging not just to businesses, but workers as well. It was obvious. It'd be far more effective for the labour movement to achieve reform if it could directly introduce legislation towards that goal. That only became practical when members got paid, allowing the formation of the Labour Party in 1891. But also basically almost every other political party in Australia exists because of members being paid. It enabled greater diversity and enabled different types of people across the entire gamut of the political spectrum to run. This wasn't just something that people realised afterwards. Near the end of the 19th century, there was a push by the public for politicians to actually be paid, so the public could have options to choose from. The public should have the choice of someone that they believe is best qualified for the role, and limiting those options to just 10% of the population does not provide that. As a writer for the Victorian Express commented in 1893, there being no salary being allowed in West Australia for legislative services, only the opulent are enabled to take a seat in either house. This would be all very well if wealth represented ability and bricks and mortar brains, but unhappily such is not the case. Among the most affluent are frequently to be met with some of the biggest noodles drawing breath. And to be fair, some people want to vote for the biggest noodle drawing breath and other people don't, so we have way more options than before. Even when the class divide was challenged, it still proved a problem. In 1859, Charles Jardine Don, a stonemason, was elected to the Victorian Legislative Assembly. He claimed to be the first of the working class to be in any legislature within the British Empire. He was an interesting character and described by an English journalist as a cross between a poet and a pirate, Byron and his corsair. When he spoke, he could become animated and shouted, screamed, bellowed, bullied, always talking with some point and ability. In an obituary, this chaotic and boisterous voice was described as causing members of Parliament and those in the public galleries to shudder and shrink away from the tornado of the people's man, which makes him sound like the sickest tradie ever, like a real bloke who was just had a bit of the dramatic arts in him. Sounds fantastic. But at this point in history, he didn't get paid for the lengthy hours of debates in Parliament. Parliament used to meet later in the afternoon and go long into the night instead of starting in the morning like it does now, because that allowed members to work during the day for a living, then come into debate. For many, this meant sitting in an office and having clients come to them, then travelling down the road to Parliament to continue sitting down. Or, travelling on train for a few hours in the morning if you were one of the rare few who actually represented the country areas. For Charles, he didn't have to travel very far because for a while, his day job was literally constructing Parliament House. The library and the eastern extensions of the Victorian Parliament were being built while he was a politician. So after a hard day working with tools, he'd then be in the chambers right next to the construction site and debating long into the night with different kinds of tools. His voice and wit. Unfortunately, the toll of working so much was hard on him and he became drinking heavily, causing further decline in his health. So, while he demonstrated that it was possible for working class people to get into Parliament despite the obstacles, it also showed that the demands of the job were just too much to do without support. And that's before the demands of the modern Parliament. There were far less sitting days in the 19th century compared to now to allow members to have other jobs. Even then, sometimes members wouldn't always show up because they were busy and had to earn a living, so attendance could be inconsistent. But with the growing complexity of the modern era, and there being far more electors to represent and communicate with, the list of legislation being considered every year is much larger. A Member of Parliament's job can easily require 12-plus-hour workdays during sitting weeks. It's just no longer practical for a member to have a day job and be an MP. It was barely practical for many in the 1800s, and it's only gotten more time-consuming. But as I pointed out at the start, paying members opens up the job to far more people and provides the public with options to choose from. While there still are wealthy lawyers and businessmen in Parliament, there are also former teachers, farmers, journalists, police, electricians, doctors, carpenters, retail workers, and many more professions that bring a broader range of experience, perspectives, and choice to our Parliament. Parliament is not and should not be a place that is only for a few inner city elite people to work at. It should be a place where people, regardless of their work experience or geographical location, can aspire to be if they choose to run for public office. Some people aim to become career politicians in major parties and be public servants their entire life, while some people create parties aimed at specific issues and campaign on seeing that one thing change before never touching political office again. Both of these and everything in between is possible because the job is open to so many people thanks to actually paying members, and that enables Parliament to become more representative and more democratic. Again, how much that salary is and what benefits politicians get, well, that's a different discussion and a bit more complicated. The point still stands. Paying politicians is important to provide the public with choice. Choice to vote for a diverse range of candidates, choice of different political parties or independents, and choice to run themselves if they consider that something they want to pursue. So hey, if you're thinking about it, maybe consider running. You might just win. And there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this quick little history lesson about the importance of getting paid. And speaking of getting paid, thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon, who for just $1 a month can make me $1 a month richer. The link is in the description if you'd also like to support me as well. Of course, other ways to support me for free include liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting down below what you would like to learn about next or how much you like my hair. And of course, I'll see you next time.